Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicolas Scherer. I'm Manager for Policy and Advocacy on Anticipation and Disaster Risk Financing with the Anticipation Hub, and it's my great privilege to guide you through today's session. For those of you who don't know us, the Anticipation Hub is a knowledge and expertise platform on anticipatory action hosted by the German Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies, and the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, and brings together more than 100 partners from across science, policy, and practice, working together to learn from each other in order to improve and scale up anticipatory action, or as we say, to do more anticipatory action, do better anticipatory action, and do it together. And speaking of doing together, we're very delighted to host and to have co-organized the event here on anticipatory action, enablers, and challenges together with the European Commission in this really beautiful pavilion. So many thanks for having us. And we have also a fantastic lineup of speakers, which I will introduce in due course to unpack how climate, development, and humanitarian actors can work together to create a system-wide shift from responding to disasters to acting ahead of them to save life and livelihoods. The session is basically divided into 3 blocks. So first we will start with some more general scene setting and on the need to work across sectors and silos, followed by a panel composed of representatives from governments and humanitarian sectors who will share their experiences and takes on institutional enablers and barriers and the pathway forward to bring anticipatory action to scale. And then a thematic panel reflecting on gaps of available funding towards the systemic change required to tackle the ever-increasing impact of climate change and outlining some potential solution. So I do hope that this session basically gets us, we'll have a better understanding of how we can come together here to bring anticipatory action to scale. And that being said, to make sure that we're all on the same page what anticipatory action is, we have a look at a short video. So I'll ask the tech team to play the video. Thank you.
Every year, the frequency and severity of extreme weather events is increasing a lot. We're seeing more severe flooding, longer droughts, stronger storms, and non-weather related problems too. And one of the major reasons these events become disasters is because people are not prepared. Yet, scientific advances have made it possible for us to better predict these events and better prepare vulnerable communities. What if you could know in advance that a typhoon might cause destruction to your home tomorrow? Or that your livestock will be in danger from a big flood that is coming in 5 days? Or that months from now you might not have food to eat because of drought? Well, we do know, and there is a lot that we can do to act ahead of these predictable events. We can evacuate families and livestock, distribute cash to avoid high-interest loans, replenish cereal banks. We call it anticipatory action, and it's here and working right now. Anticipatory action combines prediction with pre-approved action plans and pre-arranged financing to ensure that people can act ahead of disasters and lessen the impact of hazards on their lives and livelihoods. It's a strategy that can save both lives and money. Together with local experts, governments and partners, National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies are using anticipatory action to make humanitarian assistance faster, more efficient, and more dignified. Join us.
Wonderful. Yeah, anticipatory action is not just implemented by the Red Cross, Red Crescent, but also by a number of other organizations, including UN agencies such as WFP, FAO, UNICEF, and a number of civil society organizations like START Network and its members. Overall, it's implemented in more than 70 countries, and on the Anticipation Hub website, you'll find a global map on anticipatory action, a database on tested and developed triggers and actions and the evidence we've collated so far. And simply put, and just to repeat also the message of the video, we know it works. But we also know that it's not yet happening at the scale we it really needs to happen. So we need really to come together as sectors, capitalizing on our respective strength, and find and define also our roles here. And in particular, as we are heading now into a more substantial discussion around loss and damage here at COP. And with that, I would like to invite Mrs. Diana Aconcha. She is Director, International Affairs and Climate Finance with DG Klima, for some welcome remarks. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for participating in this event. And thanks a lot to our partners of the Red Cross and others for their efforts in putting together practitioners and government representatives to highlight the importance of anticipatory action to the climate and development community. As we saw in the video, last year we saw many instances of climate-induced extreme weather all over the world, from sustained drought and wildfire in Europe to extreme heat waves in China, from devastating flooding in Australia and Pakistan to freak storms in Canada, Cuba, and Japan. It is clear to us that reducing climate change-related risks, as well as the vulnerability and exposure to these risks, must be a priority, in particular because climate change disproportionately affects already vulnerable people and systems and contributes to humanitarian crises where climate hazards interact with high vulnerability. I will in my short intervention, highlight three aspects that for me are particularly important to act on this issue. And the first is to improve coherence, to work more together. More and more, we see the need for humanitarian, development and climate actors to come together, connecting the different communities of practice, striving for better coherence and coordination, and so better effectiveness of our actions. And I am making these remark first and foremost, I think, to myself, to the Commission, because we also, even within our institution, we have to work more together between the climate, the development, and the humanitarian colleagues, and the same when I'm looking at the ambassador here, because we have to work more with the member states as well. I think that this kind of collaboration is, I wouldn't say at the initial stage, but it needs to be developed more. And we also need to enhance our action and to improve the synergies, the coherence and the coordination between the efforts of international organizations, of the processes and initiatives, and as well as the multilateral and bilateral cooperation across sectors. The initiatives are there. We have to create more coherence, and we need to draw on synergies between the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Risk Reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. We welcome, therefore, the great effort of the humanitarian actors who increasingly explore anticipatory approaches and are contributing to building the resilience of at-risk communities, as well as greening humanitarian aid operations. And for a moment, bringing us back to the negotiations taking place as we speak, let me highlight that the EU welcomed the launch of the 3-year Glasgow Dialogue, which started last June this year in Bonn, and we are particularly appreciative of the engagement of the humanitarian actors in it. The humanitarian system is a capable, effective partner for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage, both in terms of sudden onset events and the effects of slow onset events, such as drought and famine. In other words, you are the experts, and we have to draw on this experience. The second point that I wanted to make is that we need to scale up our anticipatory action. This is one of the key areas where we need to make progress in order to reduce impacts of events by acting before they happen, thus reducing vulnerability to hazards over the long term and reducing the humanitarian impact, so resulting in less loss and less suffering. And I know that this is easier said than done, but the fact that we are here shows that we are all aware of the need to become stronger on this point. And my final point is on the expectations for this COP. We expect that COP27 will send a strong political signal of commitment to enhance the financing architecture for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. Having recognized the urgency and diversity of needs, we need to demonstrate now how we can better mobilize the international community to address them. In the first instance, by scaling up and strengthening what we know that can help. These should include the solutions from the humanitarian sector, the initiatives to strengthen and expand early warning systems, and other initiatives which increase knowledge of and access to climate and disaster risk finance and insurance mechanisms. Last but not least, getting the Santiago network up and running would be an essential element of the way forward at COP. The EU has been calling for the Santiago network to be operationalized as quickly as possible, and 4 EU member states pledged funds to the network already in Glasgow last year. We very much appreciate the Red Cross's and other humanitarian actors' engagement in this process. I look forward to the presentations which will explore barriers and enablers to anticipatory approaches based on the concrete experience from the field. And that's it on my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this warm welcome and also for underlining the need and the potential when we come together as different sectors. Now I'd like to hand over to Ambassador Potzel. She's Director General for Crisis Prevention, Stabilization, Peacebuilding and Humanitarian Assistance at the German Federal Foreign Office. Germany, this year holding also the G7 presidency, has been a key promoter, co-promoter of anticipatory action. And very pleased to hear your welcome remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to be here and to actually make the pitch for anticipatory action. Because we are very convinced, and as you were saying, we were kind of spearheading developments there as well. Let me just start off with like 2 examples. In 2021, the FAO report stated that they spent $230 million on preventing a locust plague in the Horn of Africa. Now that sounds like quite a substantial amount of money, but they also said that preventing damage or the damages later on would have cost 1.7 billion. Another example is, for instance, the prevention of sort of the repercussions of a harsh winter in Mongolia. Providing cash assistance upfront and also animal care kits made it 40% less likely that people had to sell assets. And so that had, of course, a tremendous impact also on livelihoods there. So I think there are a lot of convincing examples that, as you said, anticipatory action really works and prevents damage and also helps livelihoods. And there are many more of these examples. We have currently more than 60 pilot projects around the globe in anticipatory action. I think we have come a long way already, but obviously more needs to be done. But we have come a long way by collecting data, by setting up the right systems and act in a preventive manner. And I would like to thank all the organizations and also the Red Cross being so helpful in that. But still, if you look at the numbers, 20% of disasters are predictable, we say. But less than 2% of humanitarian budget spending goes to anticipatory action. So we are strongly lobbying others to also join in and support this. We also feel that we need to mainstream and scale up, as you said. So what do we need to do? I think we need to improve the systems that are triggering anticipatory action. We need better data, and we need early action better put in place and the processes better. We also need to cooperate, as it was said, far better with development actors and also with climate experts. This is one reason why we also finance and support CRAFT, the new mechanism, funding mechanism, which aims at collecting and sharing data on crises. And they have just issued an open call for proposals, for instance, on climate fragility risks. And we would be, if I may use this opportunity also to invite others, we would be very happy if more countries would support CRAFT in its important work by financing. We also need more fuel money. So that makes it easier to immediately react when the alarm goes off, kind of thing. Germany, therefore, will reserve 5% of its next year's humanitarian budget for anticipatory action. I actually hope that we can see even a little bit more. Now, 5% that would, for us, mean 100 to 120 million euros that we are going to spend on anticipatory action. And as I said, we lobby others to follow suit. During our G7 presidency, you were referring to that, we succeeded in agreeing on a statement and all the G7 members committing to scaling up their funding for anticipatory action as well, which is, we feel, a very good step forward. Now, I know that there is a lot of criticism also and doubt about anticipatory action, and a lot of people say, yeah, but what is happening if there's a false alarm? Then we have spent the money in vain. We feel that it's not in vain because, like, for instance, digging a drain or vaccinating animals has a long-term effect, even post-hazard or if the hazard is not happening. So we are convinced that one should be lucky if the disaster doesn't strike, and if we have invested in long-term help, that is actually a good sign. So we really feel that anticipatory action is an important tool to avert and to minimize risk and the consequences of climate change as well. So it's also, I think, uplifting for me to be here at COP and see that others are buying into it more. I was at a meeting this morning with the Munich Security Conference, and there also the UAE minister strongly made the case for anticipatory action, which was great to see. And also the Assistant Secretary of DRR was there, and she also underlined that point. So I think we are here in a wonderful community of believers, so to say. So it's wonderful, and I really hope that more people would realize the enormous chances, and as I said, not only in terms of saving money, but really in protecting livelihoods and averting disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much for outlining again the potential of anticipatory action and also the momentum that you just described around anticipatory action to minimize and avert climate-related loss and damage. So we heard already that we need to come together as sectors to bring this to scale, but what does that actually mean in practice? We will now gradually dive deeper into this question, and this is why I would like to invite now Carina Bachhoven, she's Associate Director of the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, for a short keynote outlining first ideas. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nico, and thank you to the speakers and to all of you for being here today. It's a very important topic, of course, and one that's close to our heart as the Red Cross, Red Crescent. I think it's incredible that we can hear today how the Germans are setting aside 5% of their humanitarian funding for pre-arranged finance, and the humanitarian system has become more anticipatory, and that's excellent. That is transformation. That is a paradigm shift that we are looking for. This wasn't the case in the past. Right now, the IFRC's Disaster Response Emergency Fund is having a window for anticipatory action where funds can be released within hours based on a forecast and not waiting until the hazard has actually struck. And so this is actually huge. It's to be celebrated. But of course, anticipatory action remains all too often seen as humanitarian action. And we must move past this. There is tremendous potential to bring climate and development actors into this space. We must reposition anticipatory action as a climate and development issue. And while, yes, we always need more funds to flow from the humanitarian sector, for example, in anticipatory action, there are systems that need to be in place and capacities that need to be existing at the local level so that we can ensure that the money that flows is spent as effectively as possible once it does flow. That can be, for example, systems or improved data, improved early warning information, capacity of local communities to take action when the funding comes, or before the event happens, even if the funding doesn't come. They have the information, they're empowered to respond in advance in a dignified manner. So the good news is that while this is right now all too much in the humanitarian realm, there is tremendous potential, and humanitarian and climate donors, I think, are very interested in this sort of capacity building and systems strengthening. This is where they have, could say, their comfort zone, where the traditional longer-term development programming and longer-term risk reduction is possible in those investments in long-term risk reduction. For example, the Green Climate Fund is working with the IFRC to strengthen forecast-based finance systems. And I would say donors from the climate and development field are also perhaps can take some comfort that they're not necessarily putting their funding forward where it may be considered wasted or in vain, but really this is funding to strengthen systems and build capacities that will be reliably used and will have impacts on the ground. And again, is part of this continuum between anticipatory action, but having all the pieces in place so that we really can be as effective as possible. The other piece that's quite interesting is that the development community is already very active in crisis response. It's not actually the humanitarian community that invests the most in in response at scale. 50% of response funding came from the World Bank, for example. And so an example is CAT DDOs. They trigger on declaration of an emergency at the national level. And so we have this funding flowing. So the question is, how can we make this more anticipatory? How can we make this action happen sooner? Bringing climate and development actors into the conversation is incredibly important to think about how can we align early action, anticipatory action, with longer-term development and resilience building. Doing so, if everybody becomes more anticipatory, taking actions earlier on, it's not about growing the humanitarian pot or the development pot or having more climate funds, but it's actually increasing the amounts of these pots concurrently. And that's actually what we want, and we want this to be part of one holistic system that's building resilience over the long term. The Global Shield aims to do this, to reduce the fragmentation, to improve the coordination, and move past these piecemeal approaches. I'll say two more points. Very important, of course, is to have governments on board. This issue of humanitarian climate development, I think there's a cartoon that we can show in just a minute. It's not staking your claim, but it's really coming together, and it's really ultimately where the nexus happens. We've got, of course, these different sectors. We've also have to have conversations between ministries of environment, of development, of finance, of health, of social protection, of risk reduction. How do we get them all together to talk about broadening the conversation and everybody having their own respective parts?
Here you go.
Thank you. And finally, also good data and better data will be important. Again, this is an investment in the longer term sustainability of this approach. And so we need to come working together to see how we can continue to make progress, thinking long term while continuing to be better prepared in the short term and respond earlier. So I think my time is nearly up, but I do want to also invite all of you to reflect on this cartoon. The Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center has been using cartoons to help spark discussion and reflection on what's going on. So here we have someone saying, we're all on the same page. We're talking about working together, coming together, but then, such a bummer, time is up. We didn't do this early on. And so we're seeing what the science is telling us, we're seeing what's needed, and so now we need to get to action. So I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists today about how that's already taking place. Thanks, Nico.
Great, many thanks, Karina. Yeah, we will now unpack some of the themes you just mentioned for mainstream financing, coordination from a more practical perspective. And we now have our first intervention here from Nepal, Mr. Anil Pogrel. He's Chief Executive Director of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority in Nepal. And yeah, Mr. Pogrel, Given your experience also in working with humanitarian development and climate actors, what do you think is a critical enabler that could help us to scale up anticipatory action? And could you tell us also, we talked about mainstreaming, what Nepal is doing to adapt its legal frameworks and policies to enable anticipatory action?
Audible? Yes. First and foremost, huge thanks for putting up this panel. We at Nepal have been going through, again, multiple water-induced and climate-induced disasters every year after year. Let's take for the case, last year what happened is even before the monsoon hit us, we got a very bad disasters all over the mountains. Melamti is a case in point where our massive investments on infrastructures and our settlements have been wiped out. Our agriculture was massively kind of impacted last year again after the monsoon, when the monsoons were declared over. So these are key signature events that we've been able to experience that weren't there as a part of our life. So this is something a total disruption. That's what's happening in the Nepali Himalayas. Now, what we see is, again, it's only been 3 years ever since Nepal's NDMA, the National Disaster Management Risk Reduction Authority, has been established. And what we've been able to notice is, again, doing things differently is what really makes a difference. Anticipatory action is definitely one of those. What we see is 4 clear enablers for this. I'd like to say key enablers, not the full spectrum of list that I could run into. But what we see is a need for a clear and a common understanding on anticipatory action across all these 3 set of actors, the humanitarian, the climate, and the development set of actors. We need to be able to clearly tell how are we doing it differently. Instead of, again, running after event strikes, how do we better prepare for it? How are we able to mobilize systems, institutions, stockpiles, and also actors on the ground? Secondly, as Madam Dian has said, how do you bring together all these set of actors? We are a government institutions, but how we behave and how we act is like a platform that brings in multiple NGOs and INGOs, civil society actors, together into a common platform. So bringing all these set of actors, defining the rule of game is equally important. And and more importantly, it's also should be driven by the national processes, where we have a federal system of governance, where we have a national system, a provincial system, and a local systems. So how all these actors come together and then support these 3 levels of governance. So that's a way that we're actually trying to look at, especially when it comes to enablers. Third is data, but I'd try to kind of qualify this further by saying risk information. How do you visualize risk information down to a local level? How our local mayors, our local ward chairs are able to understand that data, and so that they're able to take action on it? Sometimes we do have tremendous amount of data, but we're not able to understand it, use it. It's only been used by the technical actors. So how do you make it in such a way that it's visualized, it's used by local governments, but they're also the ones who will lead to actually curate and update those data systems. We've been able to show it through the case of, again, household level mapping using local governments, where we are able to kind of map down to a household level whether a person has a disability, whether a lady is pregnant, whether she's lactating, or if she's if there's a person that has elderly families. Until and unless we don't have it visualized down to a local level, and we're not able to put this risk information, it's going to be so difficult for us to really trigger those things and then mobilize things. So this is a case in area that we've been able to kind of do it, create a national data system where we are able to visualize risk. And the most important of all, the fourth thing is, again, investments. I'm really glad to know there's quite a substantial amount of investments been set aside for this, but this is yet it's too little, too late, I guess. So what we're doing is, I think it'll be really good to really up those investments, perhaps, again, like what EU is doing, German government is doing, and so that other governments also do come into the same pace, so that there's more resources into such systems, and these resources get into countries where there's already some of these impacts happening on the ground. So that's what I say is, again, 4 key enablers. Now, again, in terms of the Nepali government, what's happening, what actually we are doing in terms of taking these ideas forward. So if you really reflect on the last 10 years of history, I think this has been the strongest time where our government has been able to very clearly articulate the need for such systems. Say, for instance, the annual program and the budget speech by Prime Minister has very clearly articulated, and by far the largest investments on early warning systems. it so very clearly tells out that we need a effective and a working early warning systems for multiple hazards, for floods, for landslides, for lightnings, for cold waves, for heat waves. These are things that we've been experiencing, and these are worsening every year. So that's one. Second is we've also been able to, for the first time in history, been able to transfer money to NDRMA's account. So this is the National Disaster Management Fund, 1 billion Nepali rupees from the Prime Minister's office to be used for such responding to such disasters. But more importantly, what I'd like to say is this money, what the government has decided is to ring fence 70% for that for risk reduction and for reconstruction and recovery and times well before the disasters happen. 30% is kind of ring fence for response set of actors. These are monies, these are budgets that we could kind of, based on the executive orders by the executive committee, to be channeled down to the municipal level. This is something that we've started, and for the first time in history, the money is flowing, the financial flows is flowing down to the municipal governments. This is an example. Again, we could take it further. If there is a financing facility for loss and damage, we could use a similar route to, again, channel funds down to a municipal level. We could look at risk. We could, again, be able to kind of channel these funds to those municipal levels. That's the direction that we're taking. Thirdly, we've also been able to support those local governments to, again, align their disaster management fund guidelines on the same way. Until so far, it's only been response-centric. It's only been mobilized after a disaster is hit. So based on the example that we've been able to do, ring fence 70% for risk reduction, we're also enabling them to take a similar pathway. We're also working on coming up with a SOC responsible social protection guideline. So bringing in all set of actors, NGOs and INGOs under a task force led by the NDRMA, but where all other relevant ministries and departments come together. We've been seeking out technical support from a lot of expertise, from a lot of organizations to come together and help us to come up with a national guideline. In the same vein, again, now coming back to anticipatory action, there's not a uniform understanding on what exactly anticipatory action is. So for that matter, since last year, we've been able to do a national set of dialogues whereby we brought in a lot of stakeholders, actors together who are actually working or trying to work on this, to come together, sit down together, spend a whole 1.5 days to come up, again, what are the experiences been done so far, reflecting on our process, and to chart out ways as how we could do it in emergent and urgent actions for the next year. What we wanted to do is set up a small facility within NDMA whereby we're able to work with other set of actors, as Madam Diana said. Working together is so much important in this. Learning from each other, learning from country cases like Bangladesh or perhaps from Philippines or our country programs. So that's where we'd like to kind of have this system of exchange between the governments, between other civil society actors. These are well reflected also within our National Disaster Act and the national policy. So we're actually building on those. And first, and not the last part, what we also wanted to do is to kickstart a collaborative process where there's a framework in place by next year. This way we're seeking out technical support, technical assistance, but also reaching out to various donors for accessing funds so that there's capacity inbuilt within the Nepali institutions, within Nepali set of actors. So with this process and with the systems in place, I guess we'd be able to kind of, again, start doing things differently rather than, again, running after a disaster hits. So with these points, I'd like to stop my interventions here, but we'd be happy to kind of come and engage back if needed. Thank you.
Right. Many thanks, Spoker, for your intervention, highlighting also again that we need to have frameworks in place that are also conducive for anticipatory action, that we need also to have actionable data and a greater investment to fuel money to bring anticipatory action to scale. We are now joined by Mr. Castro. He's president of the Honduran Red Cross, and he will actually speak in Spanish, so please take one of the headphones in case you need an interpreter. Mr. Castro, good morning. Bon dia. I hope you can hear us. Really, really nice to have you here to join us virtually here in COP. Honduras Red Cross recently activated.
Very good. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be part of this event. As you're saying, we are in Honduras. This is a country that, according to the statistics of vulnerability indexes, this is one of the most vulnerable in the world. And in the last years, we have been working in a cyclic manner, meaning that we have had hurricanes For 20 years, we've had the Fifi we had in the 54. It was a big hurricane. In 98, we had another big hurricane. And now this events happened closer. Last year, during 2020 as well, we had two hurricanes, one week after the other, with a category of 4 and the other one a category of 5, with enormous destructions, and the vulnerability is huge. As the panelist before us was saying, we need to do things in a different manner, and the tools that through the federation are being impulsed by the German Red Cross, speaking about early anticipation, that for us is also a way of making things differently. We have been working for over 2 years with an early action plan, which was which has been put into place this year with Julia, a new hurricane, and it was activated on the 7th of October this year. And the impact that this hurricane had was on October the 10th. But the greatest strength it had, the greatest impact, was 2 days after that. But that allowed us to be in each of these places before it touched. These tools allow us to be present in the places, placing our equipment, personnel, staff. So it is also important that through this, we can get technical and scientific support through different activators of the national systems for the climate as well as the world systems, which allows us to have early actions identifying the risks is something also very important of what is being done on this regard. For us, as the Honduras Red Cross, we are preparing day after day to generate these actions, and this is something that we already have within our national response plan. And it allows us to have this kind of tools which brings predictability for the different organizations because these are long term mechanisms. These are planned 5 years ahead. And so we know we can have funds that are going to be used when we need to pre-position, when we need to prepare, and also when we need early actions within the communities. We can do socialization campaigns, we can transfer, we can we can fix whatever might be necessary. It allows also for scalability because it can allow us to coordinate together with other organizations, together with other agencies like the UN within the country. And in Honduras, it has allowed us to go into the risk management law, where we speak about anticipating, which is also very important for us, as the representative from the German government was saying. We need to invest more. The German government is explaining how this is done, and this is very good for the other governments to take as an example because if an early warning system works well, mortality can increase according to the statistics. And that's why we need to foster this kind of actions. And allow me to tell you, we already have an early action plan for droughts in the country. We have designed it, and we already have the first draft of an early action plan for migrations because we are in Central America and immigrants who return to the country, well, they have big issues, but the greatest number of immigrants who are in transit. They are coming from different parts of the world now to America. They need to go through our country and they need to move through Central America. And these plans allow to predict and anticipate to these actions when we get this huge amount of people. Thank you very much, and we're here to serve you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mr. Castro, and also the clear message that we need not only to invest more, but also create this conducive policy environment and set up and nurture the more strategic alliances also with hydrological services and climate scientists. And we are now also joined by Cristina Valdeamera Alvirev, I think. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Hello, nice to have you here. She's emergency manager with UNICEF in Nigeria, and in cooperation with the Red Cross, UNICEF Nigeria initiated only recently a project linking anticipatory action and shock-responsive social protection. And only in August, the project, or the trigger level basically, was reached, and an activation took place. Could you tell us a bit more about the potential of linking anticipatory action and social protection in general, and about the activation specifically, and actions you've taken and lessons learned? Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thanks so much for this opportunity to share our experiences and reflections with you this afternoon. I would like to highlight that I'm really representing the views of our entire joint project that was implemented by UNICEF in cooperation with IFRC, the Climate Center of the Red Crescent Movement, and the Nigerian Red Cross. And it's, as was mentioned, an anticipatory action in shock-responsive social protection that was supported by the European Union. And it was implemented in the northwest of Nigeria this summer, precisely in Kaduna State. So just to tell you, so what happened? So in this context, cash transfers were provided to 5,000 households before the onset of the floods this year. The cash transfer was based on a climate-related forecast and a trigger analysis. And the objective of the action was to mitigate the impact of flooding for vulnerable families. In terms of results, and then I'll come to two key lessons learned we would like to share. So in terms of results, the anticipatory action was triggered with a 5-day lead time in early August, which initially turned out to be a false alarm. However, all actors managed to be on the ground within 48 hours of the trigger and to deliver the cash transfer. As the previous speaker mentioned, the cash was accompanied by other preparedness measures by the Red Cross, such as to clear the drainage in the communities and engage the communities on the risks related to flooding. Eventually, as we probably all know, all communities were flooded 1 month later, after the cash transfer and after the trigger, as part of the worst. Yes, as part of the worst floods that affected Nigeria in over a decade. This highlights another element, which has been mentioned also by the Climate Center, namely that flooding is not happening during the traditional months of July and August anymore, but in this era of climate-related crisis, we have to look at a much longer time frame in order to also operationalize climate-related actions. And then for sustainability reasons of our initiative, we're now working with the state authorities in Kaduna on how to include the families that benefited from the cash transfer in the state-led shock-responsive social protection register. I'll come back to this in a minute. Maybe I would like to share two main takeaways on how to scale up anticipatory action and shock-responsive social protection. First, especially for West Africa, we may need more precise climate forecasts that enable the operationalization of anticipatory action in precise locations. The Climate Center in our project used the Global Flood Awareness System after having done a mapping of all available forecasts and deemed that this GLOFAS is the most precise forecast. The Nigerian government has excellent information on past disasters. And based on this evidence, UNICEF worked with the Nigerian Emergency Management Authority, or NEMA, on a country-wide risk analysis last year. And this risk analysis helps to identify regions up to the district level, but not precise communities. So again, if we operationalize actions, it's the precision will be an issue. And there comes, so I'd just like to highlight that the previous comments on more data, more available data to scale up anticipatory action is key. Secondly, the second takeaway is really on the scale up of the government-led shock responsive social protection system. So we're excited to work with the state authorities on system strengthening. In particular, we're working with the Kaduna government on adding the families we serve in their rapid response register. And the state government has created this separate register during the pandemic to mitigate the socio-economic impact of COVID. So hence our vision for linking anticipatory action to shock responsive social protection is to support government in registering and have funds available for specific shocks, like flooding in our case. So this is a so-called emergency registry, which is separate yet complementary to regular poverty-related government cash transfer programs. So it's really a great opportunity, and it's with great thanks to all the partners, the support, and also the great cooperation by the government authorities that we're working on this together, and hope we're being able to contribute to the scale up in times to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and also for the clear call to make, to improve all the data and build upon existing structures, for instance. And you might have noticed that we have secretly here exchanged the panelists, at least those here in the room can see that. Thank you again, Mrs. Akoncha, Mrs. Fossil, Karina, Mr. Forkel for joining, and welcome Ben Webster and Christina Benet here on stage to unpack the last topic, a theme that we have already heard a couple of times now in this discussion, financing. This is the money talk. And Ben, you're head of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership. Could you elaborate a bit? What do you think are the gaps in available financing for anticipatory action, and how we can address that to scale up?
Thanks, Nico, and great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I mean, I'm really encouraged by today's conversation because we've recognized some of the challenges that exist, but I'm also encouraged by the fact that we have an existing platform to try and bring together the climate, the humanitarian, the development actors across governments, civil society, international organizations, but also private sector, which we haven't talked about today. The Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership was launched in 2019 specifically to try and bring these different communities together. And therefore, you know, I'm hugely encouraged by the trajectory. It sounds as if we are landing on the same page, but now we really need to get into the implementation, the how. We need to move from the rhetoric, you know, the principles, to implementing this at the national level, at the local level. So I'm really encouraged by the recommendations of a report that we commissioned as a partnership earlier this year as well, which are addressing precisely the issues that Karina was raising earlier in her opening remarks, that we do need to reposition this topic not only as a humanitarian concern or issue. We need to transform the language so that this resonates with the developed development colleagues, with our climate community, and across all of these different stakeholders who need to be engaged on these issues. Secondly, we need to absolutely draw on the expertise and the experience from the private sector. To give a small example, the insurance industry has been working on some of these issues for decades, if not more than a century. So how can we tap into and harness that expertise to be able to inform, the projects on the ground, the delivery of these projects. And then finally, it was great to have Mr. Pokhrel from Nepal here, because we have to support governments to make this a truly sustainable endeavor. We need to put them front and center to be able to create these mechanisms to have projects that support governments in delivering this in the long term. So I would encourage people to read the report that's on our website that goes into more details around these recommendations. But I'd also encourage you to join this platform. We have a partnership that brings together the governments and the civil society and the international organizations and the private sector. We recognize that we have to work together, and now we need to get on with the implementation. But I know there's still a lot of work to do in the humanitarian sector specifically, so I'll let Christina elaborate on that component.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben, for this intervention. Christina, Start Network recently just launched a report which outlines that the funding commitments towards anticipatory action does not match existing abilities also to model and forecast crises. And what do you think do we need to scale up financing for anticipatory action?
We do need to scale up financing for anticipatory action. So I represent Start Network. And Start Network, for those of you who don't know us, it's a membership organization of 85 civil society groups representing local, national, and international NGOs working across 6 continents. And we've come together because we want to change the way that the humanitarian system operates. We want different approaches. And part of that is driven by this fact that, we see loss and damage not in terms of the dollar amounts that are lost in infrastructure, in economies, but really about the loss of human potential in a loss and damage conversation, the loss of lives, livelihoods, cultures, societies. And we believe that that doesn't need to happen. But the humanitarian financing system right now is not fit for that purpose. It is late, it is unpredictable, and it is inadequate to deal with the kind of emergencies that we're looking at. Climate emergencies require early action, predictable action, and coordinated action, and we're not set up to do that just yet. We do believe that anticipation and prearranged financing is the way to be more coordinated, more predictable, and faster at what we do. And I think we've all made the case up here in order to be able to do that. And so last year at COP26, we launched a financial services platform that mixes and matches different funding instruments and tools: insurance, disaster risk financing models, and national funds, to be able to act earlier, act more predictably, and act in more adequate ways for the range of emergencies that we're facing. But to get to the piece of research you mentioned, ahead of this COP, so a few weeks ago, we launched a report about the potential for anticipatory action. And what we looked at in that report were 2 things. 1, what does the implementation gap look like? And 2, what is the potential for setting targets for anticipatory action in the humanitarian space? And on the implementation gap, like the ambassador from Germany, we found that 1 to 2% of humanitarian financing goes to anticipation. And that's despite 85 governments pledging, committing to more anticipatory action during a high-level event with the UN Secretary General last year. It also includes successive commitments by G7 governments at successive G7 meetings to scale up anticipation. So there is much more potential for what we can do, and we're not doing it yet. In terms of modeling targets, or what does that potential look like in real terms? An earlier piece of research we had done suggested that 55% of humanitarian emergencies are somewhat predictable. And that differs a little bit from what the ambassador said, when she said 20%. But we wanted to dig into that a little bit more. So we did. And we found that within that, a quarter of humanitarian emergencies are actually modelable. The types of emergencies they are, you can actually model. You can model the risk, and you can pre-arrange and finance ahead of that risk, so that it is available immediately when it triggers. But also 50% of those emergencies can be acted upon early. They may not be modelable, but you can act ahead of the full scale of needs coming into play, so mitigating losses by acting early. So in terms of setting targets, I think donors have to look at their own, they have to map their own allocations and their own budgets to humanitarian emergencies to figure out how much of those emergencies are predictable, how many of them can be dealt with by prearranged finance, and make up their own targets. But that 1/4 and that 50% should serve as guidance and guidelines about the potential to scale up this type of finance. I guess I would also say that setting targets and the finance behind this isn't the only way to scale up anticipation. It's also about investing in systems. And investing in systems is everything from investing in modeling new hazards in many more countries, because as we've all said, and we heard from the EU, this is all of us. We're all affected by these emergencies. So there's no country that is untouched by this. We need more hazard modeling in more countries. We also need to be investing in the very things that we're all talking about, bringing together the climate, the humanitarian, and the development financing communities around these problems. Anticipatory action can protect climate investments. It can protect development investments. So of course, it should all work together. Anticipatory action for me is the nexus in operation, for those of you who know about all of the lengthy conversations we've had over the years on the humanitarian development nexus. The other thing I would say is we would also call for the investment in early warning systems in all countries in 5 years, as the Secretary General has said in his remarks a couple of months ago. So I guess I would just end by saying, and sort of repeating what others have said, that we have the knowledge, we have the science, we have the tools. Increasingly, we have the evidence that anticipation is faster, it's more dignified, and it's more cost effective. So it is unjustifiable at this point that we would continue to operate the way we always have been and continue to stand still. Thanks.
Great. Many thanks, Christina, and also Ben again for this really clear message that we need to link anticipatory action better to disaster risk financing, work on setting financial targets, and invest also more in system building. And with that, I'd like to close this wonderful session. I think this was a very rich discussion, very encouraging messaging. I very much enjoyed it to be here. And my 3 takeaways, I guess, are we need greater investment in forecasting capacity, but also in risk communications. We need greater support for mainstreaming anticipatory action in national climate and disaster management frameworks, and we need to fund anticipatory action at greater scale by making disaster risk financing more accessible also to local actors and humanitarian agencies. And with that, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye. Have a good afternoon.